Welcome to the Clara Naraccio Daily World Brief, available at claranaraccio.com. It is Monday, June 15th, 2026. If you were hoping the diplomatic ink in Switzerland would immediately unfreeze global shipping, think again. The United States and Iran have agreed to a memorandum of understanding aiming to end the nearly 4-month conflict in the Gulf.
Right, and the formal signing ceremony for that is actually scheduled for this Friday in Switzerland. So the framework extends the current ceasefire by 60 days, and the immediate goal is lifting the U.S. naval blockade and reopening the Strait of Hormuz to commercial shipping, toll-free.
But the physical reality of the region is lagging far behind that diplomatic paperwork. Reopening a choke point like the Strait of Hormuz does not magically restore shipping to pre-war levels.
No, it really doesn't. I mean, locating and neutralizing all the naval mines that were deployed over the last 4 months is going to require fleets of specialized minesweepers and, underwater drones.
Yeah.
It's a process that's estimated to take 40 to 50 days just to clear.
Which is complicated by the fact that ocean currents actively shift those explosives. Independent observers are going to have to meticulously verify every square mile before any major maritime corporation actually risks sending a vessel through.
Exactly. Because holding the paperwork doesn't secure the water.
Signing this agreement is essentially like buying a foreclosed house where the previous occupants left hidden explosives under the floorboards. Holding the deed doesn't mean you can safely move your family in today.
That is a perfect way to put it, honestly. Because while the diplomats are, celebrating the paperwork, you have 300 fully loaded commercial vessels currently sitting stranded in the Gulf. And there's another 300 empty tankers just waiting in the Gulf of Oman. The bottleneck is massive.
And holding a press conference does not suddenly convince a logistics CEO to risk a multi-million-dollar asset, especially considering the maritime insurance industry is acting as the actual governor of global shipping here, and their war risk insurance premiums remain astronomical.
Yeah, they're sitting at 1 to 4% of a vessel's total value per transit. So for a standard oil tanker, you are looking at adding $8 million to the cost of a single trip.
Those costs immediately trickle down into global energy prices and household inflation. You also have the wild card of Israel, whose government has explicitly stated they are not bound by this U.S.-Iran agreement and will continue to act independently in their own self-defense.
Right, so the risk hasn't evaporated. And speaking of wild cards, the celebration of this deal in Washington took a highly unconventional form yesterday.
Donald Trump marked both the ceasefire framework and his 80th birthday yesterday by hosting a $60 million UFC cage match directly on the White House lawn.
Beneath a giant steel canopy, no less. And the winning fighters were actually greeting the president on a live microphone.
One of those fighters, Josh Hokett, used his post-fight interview to broadcast a false transphobic conspiracy theory about Michelle Obama. Trump also utilized that massive audience to announce a July 4th rally commemorating the nation's 250th anniversary.
The contrast between that spectacle in Washington and the diplomatic scramble happening in Europe today is it's jarring. Because the G7 summit is beginning today in Evian-les-Bains, France.
And just across the border, police in nearby Geneva, Switzerland, deployed tear gas and water cannons to disperse anti-G7 protesters. French President Emmanuel Macron is now tasked with navigating an incredibly volatile diplomatic environment.
He really is. I mean, he has to secure international funding and technical assistance for that urgent 50-day mine-clearing operation in the Gulf, all while managing a U.S. administration that approaches international relations through a highly transactional lens.
Macron is also facing a direct economic threat from Washington. Trump recently threatened 100% tariffs on French wine and champagne. That threat is direct retaliation for a 3% French digital services tax targeting American tech companies.
Yeah, so France attempts to tax Silicon Valley for operating within its borders, and the U.S. president responds by threatening to price France's most famous heritage exports out of the American market entirely. Macron has to steer a summit focused on global stability, while the U.S. administration actively signals its willingness to upend traditional trade alliances over these domestic grievances.
During the UFC event yesterday, sections of the White House crowd were chanting, "Canada is the 51st state," during a bout involving a Canadian fighter. It highlights a deeply confrontational posture, precisely when Europe is desperate for cohesive transatlantic coordination. In a related development, while the G7 focuses on pausing the conflict in the Gulf, another region continues to suffer massive escalation.
Right. Russia launched a devastating overnight attack on Ukraine. We're talking 70 missiles and 611 drones.
Those strikes killed 11 people, including 5 rescue workers in Kharkiv. The historic 11th century Dormition Cathedral in Kiev was severely damaged and set ablaze. Ukrainian President Zelensky is arriving at the G7 today, pleading specifically for advanced anti-ballistic missiles.
Targeting rescue workers is a grim, deliberate tactic designed to dismantle the very infrastructure of civilian survival. And, devastation in Kiev stands in chilling contrast to the sanitized corporate environment unfolding in Berlin today.
At the ILA Military Air Trade Show, the German defense industry is experiencing what can only be described as a gold rush atmosphere, with Germany's defense budget hitting 108 billion euros for 2026.
The convention halls are packed. There are 750 exhibitors from 37 countries, and the overwhelming focus there is on unmanned systems and AI-driven loitering munitions.
The tech industry rebranding of weaponry deliberately obscures the human reality of what those weapons actually do. Terms like unmanned systems and loitering munitions sound like warehouse logistics software or teenagers lingering outside a convenience store. In reality, a loitering munition is a disposable combat drone designed to circle an area autonomously, hunt for a target using artificial intelligence, and then detonate upon impact.
Exactly. It completely masks the grim truth that these devices are built to autonomously hunt human beings. We are witnessing the rapid normalization of autonomous warfare. Startups are securing lucrative military contracts by adopting a Silicon Valley pitch culture for lethal technology.
Traditional manufacturers are entirely pivoting their business models as well. A company historically known for manufacturing printing presses has now entered the drone defense market. We are watching defense contractors discuss lethal capabilities in air-conditioned convention centers, while actual rescue workers are being hunted and killed by the exact same category of technologies in Ukraine.
We are sanitizing slaughter through corporate jargon. The Black Hornet 4 Nano UAV, which was demonstrated inside a netted drone cage in Berlin this week, is pitched as a marvel of engineering, right? A sleek gadget. But its application is inherently lethal. It removes the human element from the trigger, turning combat into a remote, algorithmic process.
For more daily briefings, brain candy explainers, and classic audiobooks, visit clarineratio.com. Building on this integration of tech and warfare, a major divide in corporate governance has opened up between the two leading AI firms, Anthropic and OpenAI.
Yeah, both of those companies are racing toward initial public offerings, eyeing trillion-dollar valuations. Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei recently called for a pause on AI development over severe safety concerns.
Amodei explicitly refused to allow the U.S. military to use Anthropic's Claude AI for mass surveillance or autonomous weapon systems. The Pentagon responded to that ethical boundary by classifying Anthropic as a supply chain security risk,
Which is a severe federal designation normally reserved for foreign adversaries or compromised vendors, not domestic tech companies that are prioritizing safety. Meanwhile, OpenAI, which originally launched as a safety-focused nonprofit, has eagerly stepped in to fill the void, and their software is now slated for widespread Pentagon deployment.
When the U.S. government penalizes an AI company for enforcing ethical boundaries, it actively incentivizes a race to the bottom. The Pentagon is sending a clear market signal that the most compliant, least cautious firms will be rewarded with massive federal contracts to build the architecture of modern warfare.
Right, but there's a fascinating financial contradiction here.
Despite being the cautious company actively blacklisted by the U.S. military, Anthropic is projected to generate $47 billion in enterprise revenue this year. OpenAI is projecting $30 billion. Anthropic has over 1,000 enterprise customers spending more than $1 million annually, while OpenAI relies heavily on monetizing 900 million mostly free consumers. Does this prove that corporate responsibility is actually more profitable, or is the Pentagon contract a sign of where the real unchecked power lies?
Well, in the private sector, major corporations are terrified of the legal and reputational liabilities associated with unregulated artificial intelligence. A bank wants the AI that hallucinates the least, the one with the strictest safety guardrails, which is Anthropic's entire selling point. So safety is highly profitable commercially.
But the Pentagon contract points to where the raw state power resides. If ethical restraint is treated as a security risk by the government, the military-industrial complex will simply bypass those restraints and fund whichever tech executives are most eager to cash a government check.
Exactly. We are effectively outsourcing the moral parameters of autonomous weapons to whichever startup is willing to ignore the consequences.
Moving from the macro-level machinations of states and tech giants, we have to examine the micro-level human impact. High-level policy shifts and state violence ultimately fall hardest on vulnerable populations who lack institutional protection. In China, Heavily armed SWAT police raided a Sunday service of the Early Rain Covenant underground Protestant church in the city of Jiangyu.
And the details of that raid exposed the profound insecurity of the Chinese state regarding any unsanctioned civic gathering. At least 50 officers stormed the room, locking children and the elderly in a hotel ballroom while detaining the church leaders.
The congregants were subjected to rigorous identity checks and heavily pressured to sign affidavits renouncing their affiliation in exchange for their release.
Because the Communist Party continues a relentless campaign to force the country's estimated 44 million Christians into state-sanctioned, heavily monitored churches.
The state treats peaceful, independent worship not as a matter of personal belief, but as a direct threat to absolute control. You have a massive apparatus of state security mobilizing SWAT teams against elderly people singing hymns in a hotel ballroom.
It really demonstrates what happens when the state views its own population as an adversary. And whether it's a state directly crushing religious assembly in China or opportunistic syndicates exploiting refugees, the core mechanism is identical. Authoritarianism actively produces displacement, and displacement breeds secondary exploitation.
Which brings us to Southeast Asia, where Burmese refugees fleeing the junta's violence have been targeted by an international college scam. An agency calling itself Brighter Future Way charged desperate students up to 10,000 euros for fake pathways to finish vocational schools.
Yeah, the agency promised easy visa approvals and free education in Finland, heavily leaning on the country's reputation as the happiest place on earth. The founder, Min So Shui, was recently arrested in Finland, but the damage is already done. The students are now heavily indebted and trapped in Thailand.
Western nations tightening their visa restrictions out of fear of fake asylum claims inadvertently created the very black market that ruined these families. By closing official doors to refugees and increasing the bureaucratic burden of proof, immigration policies funneled vulnerable people directly into extortion traps.
The mechanics of the scam are just heartbreakingly precise. The students thought they were buying safety, but the agency placed them in online language classes with no teachers, while their visa applications were systematically denied by Finnish authorities for insufficient financial proof.
The agency knew the applications would fail. They spoofed the financial documentation, pocketed the 10,000 euro fees, and left the applicants to face the Finnish rejections alone. Families in Myanmar emptied their life savings, sold farmland, and took on crippling debt for a phantom nursing school.
And you now have young individuals working grueling day and night shifts in Thai food processing factories just to pay off the debt incurred from trusting a fabricated escape route. The bureaucratic barrier designed to protect European borders became the exact tool weaponized by scammers.
The Finnish border guard is now investigating this as a case of aggravated extortion. It serves as a stark reminder of the intersection between strict border policies and desperate human need. When legal avenues for safety are choked off by paperwork, illegal avenues will inevitably commodify the people left behind.
That's entirely true. And, today's stories from the ink drying on the Iran deal in Switzerland to the AI contract signed at the Pentagon to the visas stamped for phantom schools in Finland, they all highlight a profound and dangerous gap between official paperwork and ground truth.
Bureaucracy can decree a conflict over, declare an artificial intelligence platform safe for military deployment, or process a student visa application with the stroke of a pen.
But the physical reality operates on an entirely different, agonizingly slower timeline. It takes a day to sign a ceasefire, but 50 days to clear the sea mines from the Strait of Hormuz. It takes a moment to classify an AI company as a security risk, but years to reckon with the consequences of autonomous weapons deployed in combat. The paperwork is instant, but the actual survival of human beings on the ground is arduous and incredibly fragile.
For slower, deeper context on these types of global shifts, check out Debate Candy. Thank you for listening to this briefing. For more daily world briefs, visit claranorescio.com. Remember, holding the deed to the house doesn't mean the explosives under the floorboards are gone. Keep questioning the ground truth.